When you're ready, Julie?
Yeah, good to go.
Thank you very much. Okay. Good evening, all. Welcome to this evening's P&R, and we'll crack on with proceedings. First of all, the Chair's introduction. This is a public meeting, and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photography, making an audio recording, and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you've left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Okay, to the agenda. Item 1, appointment of substitutes. Julie?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We have got one substitute, that's Jill DeSarah. She's here for Lynn Denham tonight. Also, I've had apologies from Adrian Gregson.
Many thanks. Item 2, declarations of interest. Any sign from the floor? None whatsoever. Okay, thank you. Item 3, public representations. No. Thank you. Item 4, agenda item 4 is the minutes of the last meeting, 6th of February 2024. I'll just literally read through page by the page numbers and then pause at the end for comment or questions. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12. Comment or questions with regard to those, please. Everyone content that I sign them off? Excellent, thank you. Item 5, minutes of P&GP, 28th of February 2024. I have a copy there, and I'm sure that Councillor Cochrane and I will attend to anything that you need to say on behalf of that committee. Agenda item 6, proposed committee performance scorecard 24/5. Shane?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. I think most people in the room will have been through some part of this discussion already, so I won't rehearse the preamble again. Needless to say, what we're trying to do here is reconfigure our performance management approach in the light of Oflog and the indicators that is bringing to us. I think the sense from the committees so far, as we've been there, is that the KPIs that are there already are important to the committees as part of their what's the phrase in the Constitution, determining policy matters in respect of the things within their committees. So the proposal which is in here around drawing our KPIs into a corporate report coming to policy and resources isn't one that's in the general support. So I think what we will when we come back into committee cycle in May and June, we'll be looking perhaps at a revised set of indicators for each of the committees and trying to focus more on the priorities as they're defined by the committees. Today, actually, we sat and we'll through all of the priorities that are ahead of us, and we'll be coming back with a presentation to group leaders in the beginning of next month and to committees later on in the cycle. So I think it's been a useful discussion. I've had lots of feedback, continues to receive feedback, and any thoughts members have about the proposed KPIs for this committee in particular this evening. Otherwise, we're happy to just to take that as where we are at the moment and proceed. If members have any further questions or comments or observations, I'm happy to get those, and we'll bring the conclusion of all of that back to the next committee cycle. Thank you, Chair.
Brilliant, thank you. Any questions or comment, please? Stephen Hodgson.
Yes, I'm certainly pleased that we're going to get them indicators from Oflog, which will enable this authority to compare its services against other authorities. I think I'm the most longest standing person on this committee tonight, and I can certainly remember when I first joined the council, we used to have national indicators, and we used to compare ourselves against similar cities in the same groups. That were the Exeters, the Carlisle, the Gloucesters, the Lichfield of this world. And I think, you know, you can sort of like effectively mark your own work with your local indicators. But I think, you know, when you see how you compare to other authorities, and don't forget, it's not just a question of comparing against other authorities as well. If other authorities are all showing a similar trends in that, I think it's quite useful for central government to actually understand that if a particular area of the local government sector is either excelling or is not performing to the way we should do, which should hopefully make the policymakers realise that you know, this particular area is something that actually can be done. So I think it will help you as officers as well as us members as well. So I think it's a positive thing.
Through you, Chair, just one observation. Yes, it's good that there is attention being paid to this, and benchmarking as an approach is welcome. But let's not forget these the data that's being benchmarked is 2 years out of date in most cases. So how Oflog are going to use that information and how we can use it to best advantages remains to be seen, really. But we'll see.
Thank you. Pat Agar.
Thanks. That's an important point. Thank you, Shane. I think the problem we have at the moment is the proximity of the local election, and I wouldn't really want, I mean, the composition of the council could easily change drastically. We don't know who's going to be here in a few weeks' time. So I'd be really reluctant for this to be set in stone at this stage. I think it's important that we retain some flexibility. Clearly we have to comply with Oflog, but I think we have a few weeks really beyond that, don't we?
Anything you wanted to mention at that point?
Through you, Chair, only to agree, yes, that we need to not set anything in stone at the moment. This has really been about data gathering. It has thrown up one interesting point, though. Well, several interesting points, one in particular. You know, model this approach on what we do with the finances. So we go through to all the committees, gather views, and then present those results to Policy and Resources for conclusion. But that's because Policy and Resources is the primary committee for finances, but it's not the primary committee for performance management. So where do we go for a decision? And isn't this one of the aspects of the committee approach? What happens in a case when all the committees are acting autonomously? How do we bring that together into a corporate petition? I suppose ultimately the answer is council, isn't it? That everything comes through to a council report at the end of the day. But anyway, it's just an interesting feature of what's developed through this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Jabba.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, amongst those interesting questions is the fact what others have highlighted about self-scrutiny of our own committee system, and I remember raising the point with officers regarding the possibility of having bringing back a scrutiny committee, and I've been advised by officers in particular that there's no reason why we are not able to return that. So whether that is a viable option for us to make sure that we're on track and that we hold ourselves to account.
I personally have no objection to a scrutiny committee. I see the list of governance questions growing ever longer as that we will explore in the new year, but there we are. Any other questions or comment on this one? Marjorie.
Thank you, Chair. Two things. This question of the data being out of date, have you had any information about the plans to make the data more useful?
Excuse me, through you, Chair. I've spoken with the Chief Exec of Oflog, Josh Goodman, about this, and his answer was that whilst the data that is published on the Oflog website is not currently up to date, Oflog do rely on offline or off-website data in order to better judge the performance of the councils. So I don't think that adequately answers any of our questions, because if there is a suggestion that Oflog are publishing one set of data and they're judging our performance on a separate set of data, that raises equally a number of, if not more, questions. But when I asked for an answer on the point that the data being published was out of date, that's what I received. So I suspect there will be further discussions to be had on the subject. Thank you.
Oh, no, no, I have,
Sorry, Margaret.
And I have another question, which probably has a similar answer, about further, section 2.6, further surface areas will be added and existing areas expanded as metrics are developed. Have we had any more information about that?
Yes, we've received some draft suggestions, if I can put it that way, with regard to a whole range of indicators, from a whole set of indicators around fly tipping, to indicators regarding average household wage. My response to the latter, to Oflog, was that if this is all about supporting local authorities and warning of early failure of local authorities, how does average household income fit into that category, particularly when you think about what we call the flash to bang time, the time between a particular intervention and how that would result potentially in additional income for a family is generally years. So it's hardly an early warning system, is it? And in response to that question, I was told that this is what the sector has been asking for. So there are more measures to come. Whether they all fit the bill or not, I think remains to be seen.
So obviously we'll have to keep on adjusting our scheme in line with what they come up with. I'm very glad that you're having robust discussions with them, David.
Yes, you're right. We will have to review our metrics as more and more are added to the published indicators on the Oflog website, so that members don't get caught out or left behind in terms of Oflog's thinking. Thank you.
I've got Steve Cockram and then back to Gemma.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to register my how disheartening I think it is that we are having Oflog being imposed upon us. And I totally disagree with the comments that have been made as to how wonderful performance, management and metrics are, because there's scant evidence to suggest that they improve performance. It's a well-known law that if you take a measure and make it a target, it becomes a very poor measure. The current metrics that we've been offered look quite innocent. But with the caveat that they're going to add more, and we've just heard some that will be added in the near future, and I think that it's the thin end of the wedge of being performance managed by central government, just like Ofsted, and we know that Ofsted has had absolutely no beneficial impact on education in this country, but we've had head teacher stress going through the roof, and the consequences of that in people's lives. So I think this is the thin edge of the wedge. It treats people and places and the council as if they're a machine. That you put in X and out you get Y, and they aren't. It is not a machine. We are an organic organisation, or a complex adaptive system, if you want to use the scientific term for it, which means that you can't say that you do this and you'll get that. There are unintended consequences to every action that we take, which may be positive or negative, and these metrics will do absolutely nothing to help us to feel our way forward, particularly in the uncertain times that we are facing due to climate change and the consequences of that on the city. So I think, you know, it's being forced upon us. We like can't say no, but I think that we need to carefully look at our other metrics such that we can actually produce those which are useful to help us, if you like, guide the ship in a direction that we want to travel, and not in a one-size-fits-all approach that central government has.
Thank you. David?
Thank you, Chair, through you. This subject has come up again in my conversations. The Chief Executive of Oflog has said that he will work very hard to ensure that indicators are not used out of context, or performance rather, against certain indicators is not used out of context in the media, for example, to compare councils and suggest that one council is performing poorly against another. Whether I wish him luck, if I could put it that way, in his attempt to manage the media in that respect, but to give him credit, he is aware of this particular concern and has said that he will do his best to ensure that suddenly one council does not get compared to another completely out of context, and suddenly a council is being berated by stakeholders, by the media, or by central government for their performance in a particular area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got Jabba and then Karen Lewin.
Thank you. Councillor Cochrane kind of summed it up beautifully, I think, in that we could look forward to the Good Council's Guide in a few years' time. Then is that right? You know, so when we're looking for our new house, looking to where to move in, you know, let's have a look at how our council's
We're in the
doing.
Michelin Guide.
You know,
Okay.
so you can have a Good Council's Guide and look, you know, go through anything. I mean, but on a serious point, in terms of, you know, where councils are looking for more devolution and more autonomy, this seems to be a retrograde step in the opposite direction in terms of control from central government and meddling in the wrong places. I mean, it's only a handful of councils that have actually been, if you know, questionably be mismanaging their affairs, and seems to be a knee-jerk reaction in terms of imposing the will of central government on local councils who are doing really well as well, and who have got their own sets of measures that could, you know, that are self-sufficient and that can self-scrutinise and perform above expectations. So, you know, whether these metrics that they're going to be using will be taken out of context and then, as you said, used in a league system to compare and vilify us remains to be seen, but it's a dangerous backward step. And a good suggestion is actually that we have a central government set of measures, and we have our own set of measures which are over and above to ensure that we meet our own targets.
Thank you. Karen?
Thank you, Chair. As Chair of Environment Committee, I had particular concerns about this, and what you were saying there about comparing apples with pears on statistics. One of them, of course, is recycling rates, where you see collection authorities and disposal authorities being compared unfairly, and we get portrayed as being bad when we're not. And I saw that the other week in a newspaper. But of course, what's important to Environment Committee is the service that we give our residents, and that is the knowledge of the Environment Committee members who understand and see the reports quarterly on whether bins have been missed, whether graffiti has been removed, whether litter has been collected. So I really value the KPIs being kept, but also being reviewed, because there is, for example, a KPI at the moment which is complaints on grass being cut. And we need to do more education on the biodiversity strategy for the City Council, because sometimes our grass is deliberately not cut. So we need to realign some of our KPIs to reflect the direction of the council and our policies. I think that's a really important process, so thank you very much.
Any further questions or comment? No.
I think Mel wanted.
Oh, beg your pardon, Mel.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. Just obviously, we do look at some statistics now, don't we? We have things via the LGA and that sort of thing. So it's not as though we are without them, but it is. I think it is good to get comparisons and to have data checks, but it's to have the right balance, isn't it? And yeah, thank you.
I would personally agree with that. So anyone wish to take that further? No? In which case, are you happy to, the recommendation is that we've simply considered the proposals and the content going forward, 24-25. I'm sure we'll come back to it in due course. Okay? Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 7, capital and investment strategies 24-5, 26-7. Shane?
Thank you, Chair. Another central government imposition. This one was developed during the time when they were concerned that councils were investing a lot of borrowed money, PWLB borrowing into assets. And we were obliged to publish a capital strategy which sets out our sort of borrowing proposals, and an investment strategy which looks at what we're doing with the money that we borrowed. And we have to publish them every year, and they have to be formally approved by council. But they are primarily informative. They're designed to make sure everybody understands exactly what's going on, so that people like me aren't happily running around investing all of your money in things without you being told about it. So the key indicators, just to refer to, 2.8 are the operational boundary and authorised limit for borrowing. So these have been around for a very long time, actually, as part of at the point when government devolved responsibility for putting limits on borrowing to local authorities. So, but it is worth noting that that borrowing requirement there is beginning to increase. So we're moving up from just short of 30 million rather in 23-24 up to 40 million in 26-27. Now that's not actually the amount we're going to borrow. That's just setting a limit on the amount that we're going to borrow. So we shouldn't be going above that. But the implications can be seen if you turn to, I think it's page 35. I'm sorry, I've lost it now. No, page 45 in your papers, table 8 and table 9, which are worth paying attention to, because what these show is the extent to which borrowing impacts on our revenue costs. So you can see net revenue stream, the figure in the middle there is basically council tax, business rates and government grants, and all that bottom part of our medium-term financial plan. And then what costs we're paying in terms of the repayments of our borrowing plus interest. And as you can see, that's moving up from about 10% last year, 22-23, to potentially 16% or so. So it's starting to increase. So quite a lot of the money that we're getting in terms of taxation is going on borrowing costs. Now, if you look slightly below, the table below, the positions are not quite so alarming because, you know, we get income from our investments. So therefore that reduces the net financing costs is once you've taken off the income that you're getting. So for instance, we have two investment properties that we've bought a few years ago. They generate a significant amount of income and more than pay for the borrowing costs which we incurred in purchasing them. So the position is better, but nonetheless, it's important to continue to consider what the revenue impact of capital financing is. And we are not in a position where we have a lot of capital receipts. If we haven't got government grants or income which comes from a particular purpose, then we're going to be borrowing for capital purposes. So when making future decisions, we need just to keep an eye on this. So it's worth thinking about. And the only other one I'd just like to draw your attention to is in the investment strategy, which looks at the investments that we've done. And this is one of the areas that Oflog is interested in. So on page 56 there's a table 3, which is about proportionality. It's not quite the same as the Oflog indicators, but what they were trying to get a sense of was how much of those investments in commercial properties compared to the scale of your organisation. So I think there have been some organisations where, you know, they've actually invested more, considerably more. They're getting more income from their commercial investment than their actual net spending, you know, which is extraordinary, really. Well, in our case, our commercial investments only represent about 4% of our total expenditure. So that's very proportionate, very reasonable. And that's not expanding because we're not currently looking to borrow to invest in commercial properties. It may change when we progress with some of the future high streets fund investments and the towns fund investment. But on the whole, I think we're quite proportionate there and quite reasonably balanced in terms of what we're doing. So overall, the picture is fine at the moment. It's, you know, I'm quite comfortable with where we are with these things, but just keep an eye on capital spend and what kind of impact that is going to have in the future. Chair. Any comments or questions? on that?
Excellent, thank you. Any questions or comment to the paper? Jabba.
Yeah, thank you, Shane. I mean, what is proportionate? Is that a subjective measure, or is it what percentage have they recommended is proportionate? And that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question, if in future we, go down a route of, co-investing or investing in some property schemes to, for social housing, etc., how does that affect our capital investment strategy?
Around the prudential borrowing allow for regeneration activity. So they've tried very carefully not to prevent us from investing in housing in particular, because as I always said, that housing as an area of strategic development is completely outside. It's been separated out. Carry on doing whatever you want to do with housing, recognising that the financing of that is very complex. So there's nothing to stop us doing that. And our existing policies continue to allow us to borrow to invest where there is a regeneration element to it. So as long as we can demonstrate that, then there's no barrier there. There's nothing to prevent us to continue that borrowing. But that means identifying the schemes and being very careful with the business case and making sure that they are affordable and the income that we generate from that activity is sufficient to cover the borrowing costs, so we don't expose ourselves at all. So we're still very open. It's not closed down completely, but we just need to keep an eye on it. In terms of what's proportionate, the SIPFA answer to that, well, it's whatever I think is, it's my professional opinion as to what's proportionate. You could argue that that has in fact got some authorities into difficulty, but that's why we are a very open organisation. We need to share these things and make sure that people understand what that position is, so they can scrutinise that and be clear about what it is we're trying to do. But there's no SIPFA is always shy of giving guidance on things like that. It's the professional opinion of the Section 151 officer that counts.
Okay, Karen.
Thank you, Chair. This might be a really easy question for you. It's just that I was looking, you've got, so due to decisions taken in the past, as of 31st December, the council had 16.4 borrowing, an average interest rate of 2.81%. My mortgage is up for renewal this year, and I was looking at the percentage I had and the percentages that are coming up, and obviously it's disastrous. What's the likelihood of this changing for us as a council?
Through you, Chair, there's very little, very low, because we have taken all of our borrowing out as a policy on fixed rates. So we are not exposed, very little exposed to changes in interest rate. Where there will be an exposure is that you have to divorce the lifetime of the asset from the funding system. So we might borrow an asset which has a 40-year life and do it in 2 tranches of 20-year loans. So if we take one loan out for 20 years, because we can get a very good rate on it, it's cheaper to borrow short than long, then 20 years' time, we've got to borrow again for another 20 years to finance that. And at that point, we're potentially exposed to increased interest. But we tended to borrow long-term because interest rates were very low and fix that in. So our exposure is quite small, relatively.
Okay, any further, Pat?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, we are in a position where borrowing is more expensive than it has been. I think some have said economics experts have said recently that borrowing was far too cheap recently. They may be right or wrong, I don't know, but the fact is that it's higher now than it has been. And we have done a lot of internal borrowing, which has saved us from some of that problem. I think we're getting a really rather good gross return on what we're calling our commercial properties. It's 6.4 gross. I think that's quite a stonking return, really. We're doing rather well, considering we're not exactly investment experts, although we do use Treasury experts, don't we? So congratulations are in order to our consultants on that. There are 2 questions, I think, for me, that I wasn't quite sure I understood. One was, Worcester Hockey hasn't drawn down its loan, which is interesting, because I think we borrowed from the PWLB and said, we could lend whatever it was to them, and we would actually gain on that loan to them, because the difference between what we borrowed and what they would return to us was actually quite good. something like 2%. You know, we got a marginal benefit from that, and we still managed to help the hockey club, or we would have had they drawn down the loan, but they don't seem to have. So that's one thing. And the second thing, sorry, do you want to answer that before I ask the second one?
If I may, Chair, they haven't drawn down the loan yet. It's been a long process, but they are very close to doing that now. And you are right that we will make a return because the amount that they will pay us is above the PWLB interest rate, but it's only marginal. It's only 0.25%. It was always done on the basis that we're not looking to generate, you know, significant income from this, but they would be enough to cover us in terms of risk. So it's not a great deal, but a marginal amount.
We didn't do it to make money, really to facilitate a service. Yeah, okay, so that's good news. And the development fund risks that I looked at on page 59, it's not clear to me why the development fund risk is 25%, whereas the CCLA property fund investment, which is a stock market investment presumably, is only 5%. How do you calculate that 25% there? That seems quite high. And what's the risk that it's reflecting?
Through you, Chair, I mean, this is table 5. So what we're trying to do is work out some kind of, put a figure on what the level of risk is in terms of those. So the commercial property and the CCLA fund are very long-term investments. So, and by investing in a pooled fund like that, you are spreading the risk. So, you know, some values go up over there, values fall over there, and they balance themselves out. So they're very low risk things. So we can put a very low risk on them. And then thinking about the development fund items, which were the properties that we bought, then there is potentially a higher risk. Again, you just have to make a judgment, don't you? I think we argued that because these were local, short-term, and the assets were fixed. So if, you know, one of them burns down, then there is an issue. God, touch wood. Why did I say that? But, you know, there's a potential issue. Of course, we have insurance to cover that. But it does. They are more exposed than the wider property fund. Now, I think 5% in terms of a pooled fund would be accepted industry standard. When we're dealing with our own assets, it's much harder to do. So I think we just thought, well, I just thought, let's be proportionate in terms of assessing the risk of that. It's got to be higher than the pooled fund approach, but not, you know, but we actually have the methodology we deployed minimize the risk in terms of these particular investments. So it's not that great because they're not commercial properties in the sense of like a garage or any, you know, one of those kind of things. They are offices and they are long-term, fairly set tenants, and of course, and actually we have just this week renewed the tenancy, so they're quite limited. So 25% seems like a reasonable balance. That's as much as I can say, really.
Is some of that risk really around liquidity and stuff like that?
That's a factor to take into account. Yeah, one of the considerations was liquidity. Yes, I mean they're not easy things to sell on necessarily, but then they're not that hard things to sell on as well because they're so low risk in terms of the tenancy. There's more or less a guarantee in terms of the tenancy. So if we did have to sell them on quickly to realise the funding, then that wouldn't be such a that wouldn't be so difficult to do. Obviously, it depends on the sort of commercial environment at the time, but as risks go, they're reasonably okay in terms of liquidity.
Of course, you can only sell something once, as Birmingham is finding out rather fast.
Any further questions or comment? No? Right. Strategy for 24/5 be adopted. Those in favour? I think that's unanimous. Thank you. And we move to agenda item 8, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy 23-24. Sian.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to bring the Policy and Resources Committee the annual review of our progress against our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy and our review of our equality objective, essentially. And members who've been on the committee a little while will recall that this new approach in terms of giving visibility and scrutiny and challenge to our progress on meeting our equality objective was something that we recognised a couple of years ago. We needed to just look at how we reported on this. So this has been a standing agenda item for P&R annually. And in terms of monitoring the strategy and bringing forward actions, we've been very appreciative as officers to work with a lead member for EDI to give that strategy some single focus and keep those practical discussions and the ear to the ground. So that's been a really beneficial way of working in terms of our governance. Sorry, Chair. So to supplement the approach as well as individual officers taking actions forward, we have a staff working group which meets quarterly. Again, emphasis on practical, identifying activities that people can own at different levels within the organisation. And that principle really is set out in the strategy that equality, diversity and inclusion should be everybody's business and everybody's responsibility. And what we have found, again, just from a narrative point of view, is that the more you look, the more you see, the more you can do, the more improvements you can make. And we're just trying to embed that culture into the council, officers at all levels and members. And I'm hoping that you'll see that as we come out of year 2 of the strategy, the diversity of examples demonstrates that I think that really has taken hold now as a concept, that there's something that everybody can do. So again, the report notes that building really on the council's success in terms of community engagement and local leadership, we have a strong track record in promoting civility and respectful debate. And actually there was a phrase used by Michael Gove recently in a letter to the council that I found I did agree with. Individual initiatives are designed to promote integration and civic pride and counter extremism. I think that's actually a very sensible approach for a city council to focus its activity on equality, diversity and inclusion. We cannot do everything. We're a small district council. Some of the challenges are large, multi-agency, structural, macroeconomic. Sadly, they are endemic and deep-seated, but there is a lot we can do. And so we focus on that practical community leadership approach. We follow the legal position on rights-based issues. So we make sure we're fully compliant with the Equality Act. We recognise there are some complex debates underway, and we stick to the legal position. And again, we find that even doing that, bearing in mind we have a public sector equality duty, there's plenty to do, and we're proud now to be a local leader in that regard. So then what I've done in the report, again, as previously reported, against the 4 pillars of our strategy, our 4 excellence aims, I've summarised in that table what the specific actions are that we've delivered in the second year of the strategy. So they're not baseline activities, and they're not things that we did in year 1. They're all the things that we've done specifically in year 2. And when we get to the end of year 3, we will produce a report where we will, in a nice, accessible and appealing format, we will show all the things we've done over 3 years and measure ourselves against that objective to try and get to excellent across all 4 measures. So I'm not going to list out everything that's in the table. There are a number of highlights, and I think depending on your perspective, certain things will appeal to you more than others. But to try and put some visual context into it, we've done a little photo montage in Appendix 1. But that shows you all the community engagement activities that are going on. That doesn't show you a photo of you members sitting through endless HR policies in JCSC. Everyone is playing their part. Some contributions are more visible than others, but it really does feel like a team effort now. Sorry, Chair. So then the report goes on to then look ahead about our equality objective in year 3. We're still aiming to be excellent. What are we going to do about that? Again, a set of specific actions and projects that we're working on, some of which are carried forward, but many of which are new for this year. I would like to highlight a couple of examples in terms of looking into year 3. I think that the Speak Up campaign, which members of the communities team led, has been a bit of a sleeper hit and a real success actually, and was a brave thing to do. And I was very proud to walk into the building and see colleagues just convening conversations and meetings with people who were literally coming in off the street to talk about things that they felt strongly about in terms of respectful debate and civility. And I think it was brave for the District Council to do that, and it's been really well received, and it can lead to further work and further multi-agency working. I'd like us to do something with young people that's actually got a real focus, because we do a number of strands. Some of our services are really strong in working with young people, like the museum service, for example. But I've called that Young Citizens, and I'd like that to be a team effort between members and officers, where we're really, for example, using this building and the fun you can have live streaming a committee meeting, and, you know, holding a mock election and all sorts of things. Whilst I've been sitting here tonight, somebody's emailed me about work experience. So I'm not saying that the doors aren't open, but really being really clear what our offer is to young people. I think bringing that together and making sure that we're reaching them in a way that they can relate to us is really important. Similarly, Accessible Worcester, there's a lot of leadership and advocacy being given in the city, both from individuals, disability advocates and organisations. But I think it would be good for the City Council, building on the approach that we took with our Sustainability Summit, to try and, again, lead and convene that conversation about disability access through a conference, working with other organisations in the city. You can probably imagine the sorts of organisations I've got in mind who've got a significant presence in the city. I think we should come together, and I think over a period of time we should ask some of these questions and be willing to take away a collective set of actions from those. There's work, obviously, ongoing work in relation to play provision, which you already know about. You already know about the Worcester Show and how we're trying to open that up. But the Community Marquee, again, was another sleeper hit and was a really nice informal place for people to come forward and do things and celebrate their community. And we'd like to build on that. We'd like to, we will be running a Black History Month event again, and we were just overwhelmed and touched by the feedback and the number of people who came through the doors. So there's undoubtedly an audience there. Eurofest, on the strength of Black History Month, in a similar vein, just after the elections, we'll be opening the doors to the building again and doing a European community event, much on the template that we did the Black History event. So community-led, council infrastructure supported, food, music and fun. And I believe it's the same weekend as Eurovision. The museums, again, quietly and every year successfully achieve something on diversity and inclusion that hasn't been done the year before. This year they have Arts Council funding to curate the existing collections in a way through the lens of people who don't ordinarily interact with Worcester museums or who don't obviously see themselves in the artefacts that have been collected. And again, coincidentally, that project will launch. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, but that project will launch in October, which is Black History Month. So there's already some good overlap going on there. And then we have the 80th anniversary of D-Day in the summer, and we have a day of events planned which will celebrate the contribution of the oldest generation in our society who helped secure the peace that we enjoyed today. So on that happy note, Chair, I'm going to pause.
Sian, thank you. Questions or comment? Jill.
Thank you, Chair. I thank you for the report. I'd like to particularly thank Councillor Norfolk for her contribution as being the EDI champion. I'm sure Sian would agree with that. And things that we did together, for example, the Blind City Walkabout was very successful. I think another one needs to be done, because when you talk about accessibility for people who are disabled, I think there is progress to be made, but it's nice to see what's happening here. Thank you.
I'd echo that. I think some of our member champions don't always get the recognition they deserve, but certainly Robin's work has been excellent, and I would hope that members from across the council would acknowledge that as we go forward. Jabba.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I think it's an excellent report, and we've come. I mean, in the 3 years that we've really dedicated the time and effort to understand the issues, to hear from our communities, to really understand our communities rather than being a tick box exercise. I mean, I always joke, you know, back in the 80s, and 90s, we used to have an equal opportunities policy, you know, equal opportunities. You'd have the token brown or black guy in a photograph or on a postcard to make sure that you tick that box that, you know, everybody was being kind of looked at, and that's it. It was a visible show for publicity purposes, but it didn't really mean anything. Didn't mean anything. The opportunities for those people weren't there, and you know, we didn't really engage with those communities. And I think what's really significantly changed over the and credit to this council and including Robin and the officers involved, is that we've actually set out to really understand the communities that we serve. You understand from the bottom up, it's what their needs are, how we address their issues, and how we can get them more involved to become a more inclusive council. So great credit to this council.
Agreed. Robin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues, for the fulsome praise, although I must bat some back at officers. It's been a real joy working with them over the last couple of years. I just want to make a couple of, notes and comments about the last year. It was a real joy to work on the Black History Month. It came about in such a really short period of time. Officers and the community pulled together. The music, the smells of food, the food itself, and the spoken word made it an absolutely memorable event. Steering the play strategy through PED, again, an absolute joy. I think it was one of the best reports, one of the best strategies I've read in a long time. And I must point out, and it's not said in here, that the charity Making Space for Girls are now using that as an exemplar for other councils to help them develop their play strategy. And finally, year 3 looks really interesting. And if I am successful and come back to this council in the new year, I really look forward to watching these and helping steer them through. So all I can say really is thank you, officers, for such a wonderful year this year. Would like to say one thing though. If year 3 is the end of the strategy, we shouldn't stop. We shouldn't be sitting on our laurels and saying, well, that's it. We've done being excellent at equality, diversity and inclusion. It should be a concerted effort, and I'd like to think that we can start planning that over the next year, how we continue to improve on that. So thank you, Chair, thank you, Sian, and thank you, Mr. Morris.
I'd agree with that. I think I'm certainly old enough to remember much of what Jabir said, and it's not a narrative that I remember with much or with any pleasure. So, but it's still an evolving narrative, and something we should be conscious that there's still an awful lot of work to do. So, agreed very much. Stephen Hodgson, and then Marjorie.
Yes, I think there's some really good events for this year, and I think it has been, a successful strategy. I certainly remember as mayor giving a video speech I read out for Black History Month, and hopefully lots of people viewed it online. I'm also pleased as well that we have a stand at the Worcester show as well. Hopefully, the council will have a change of heart and people can come in there for free and actually see it. But I think it is really important, and I think the 80th anniversary of D-Day and the Eurofest, they are two, things that are different to that. And I think, D-Day is very important, and there's lots of people whose families were involved in D-Day. I know the person who was my best man at my wedding. His father was one of the participants of D-Day, and he lost so many comrades in that particular campaign. So we have a lot to look forward to.
Thanks, Marjorie, then Mel.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Sian for this report, and I'd also like to thank Robin for the great part that she's played in helping us improve this area. The only concern I have really is that we're doing some wonderful things, but how do we know that we are actually doing something for all the communities in the city? There's no kind of I'm not saying that measurement is absolutely de rigueur, but maybe there should be an element of measurement in the strategy. It could be something that could be looked at when it's renewed next year. Thank you.
Thank you. I absolutely agree with your point, Councillor Bissett. And as an indicator of a scenario in which we're not reaching communities is the demographic that responds to the annual residence survey. And we have a good response rate relative to other councils, but it doesn't represent the city we serve. And we see loads of other people for events. So why don't those people want to fill in our survey? And maybe fill in a survey is a very passive way of looking at it. But finding ways, something we've talked about and haven't quite cracked, finding ways during the year to have conversations with people and then making sure that we're collecting that data if they want to provide it during the year, then the point when they're having an engagement with us, we can understand more about them. So, for example, I can tell you anecdotally that the age profile of people using 89 High Street is the much older demographic, and also people with particularly sensory impairments, for example. I can tell you that about 89, but I can't evidence it tonight. But showing those things would confirm some of our assumptions and also highlight where we're making false assumptions, and that would be helpful. And obviously, I do accept Councillor Norfolk's point that we can't stop once we've got to the end of year 3. And I go back to what I said when I introduced the report. The more we look, the more we find, and one thing leads to another, and it does feel cyclical. But again, trying to be positive, what I have found has been a pleasant surprise is that it hasn't consumed a lot of new resource. And at a time when resource is constrained, I think that's really helpful, because it can often link to something else you're doing, or it can be part funded by something else. And it's as much as anything a way of thinking, and I think that's a really positive thing to hang on to.
Chair, thank you. Yeah, just again to echo, thank you to Sean and to Robin, and I particularly like the mention of young people as well, not just small people, because I feel they really do get left out. So just a big shout out for them. Thank you.
Thank you. And
Oh, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank Sean and Robin as well. And I'm just going to say that my memory sometimes can be a bit unreliable, but there are 3 things that are just going to be stuck in my mind forever. And it's at the Black History, where we had those young people on their microphones performing. It just swelled my heart. It was just absolutely amazing. Going around the city wearing the glasses, I look at people walking around the city with a stick or with disabilities now, and I'm looking and thinking, how are they coping? How slowly they're moving? What are the problems? You know, it makes you really connect more with these people through these experiences. It's wonderful. The only thing is, I went to the training for the Gypsy Roma Traveller, and that was outstanding. You know, the people were from the community who spoke, but I was disappointed that so few councillors went to it. And I'd really like to encourage councillors to come to these, because it will create memories and it will change your perspective on communities who aren't people that you probably, you know, live with or in your friendship group. You know, it expands your mind and actually gives you a lifetime of memories that you'll treasure forever. So thank you.
agreed. Any further comment or questions? Pat Agar.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo the thanks that have already been made to both Councillor Norfolk, to Sian, to all the officers who work so hard to make this a reality. And yes, quite clearly, this is a living document, and there will be a lot of actions to come out of it, and performance will be reviewed as we go on. On a personal level, I've been to a number of these things. I mean, the Black History event here was an absolute joy, you know, being able to have those conversations with some of our residents was absolutely amazing. And I do know there are quite a number of Nigerians here, so, you know, I was having a chat to 1 or 2 of them and what their hopes were, and whether or not they would stay here, whether or not they would go back to Nigeria, what they would do with their lives, that sort of thing. It was actually quite revealing. And as someone who ran a women's centre, and had a strong track record on racial equality at the same time. It's very important to me that we do things like white ribbon campaigns, that we do represent minorities in our museum collections, as well as inviting their participation in events. But it's great to see people coming to the heart of civic life, because that, above all else, that we invite them here, that we ask them if they'll come, that we make them welcome when they do, is really tremendously important, because this building is the heart of civic life in this city. It's very important to them, to me, that it is viewed that way by absolutely everybody. And of course, as the Armed Forces champion, it's been a delight to work with the community engagement team on the D-Day arrangements. And I do hope that councillors will not just think this is all jingoistic. It's not. It's very much about the fact that a generation has passed out of living memory, and oral history is going to be very important to the museums at this point. And also, I think, at a time when the world seems a much less safe place in many ways than it seemed for a while, I think it's important for us to celebrate the peace we have and to understand the consequences of war. And so I hope very much that you'll come to some of these events and support our veterans.
Thank you, Pat. David.
Thank you, Chair, through you. I'd just like also, as the thank yous are going round, I'd just like also to thank Rich Morris, one of the officers that's been working on this project so hard. So if you're watching, Richard, thank you. But seriously, if ever there was I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, a round peg in a round hole, he's risen to this superbly. So thank you, Rich, for all that you've done. Thank you.
Very much. I mean, I'd echo everything that's been said. Genuine community is built through participation, and much of the document and everything else that we've discussed over the course of years has been built around encouraging that sense of participation. We've moved on quite a bit, in many ways. Jabba's made reference to what, things were like in the 1980s and 90s, and there has been genuine improvements, but we still live in a very cynical age. We still live in an age where people become somewhat siloed and sort of atomized within their own existences. And there are all sorts of reasons for that which are outside the scope of this meeting. What this document is encouraging people to do is to get involved in their wider community and to appreciate that there's a real, there's everything you want to find there. So I echo everything that's been said and would want to commend this document, not just to this room, but to everyone within the city. So that said, any further comment? The recommendation is we simply note the progress of at the end of the year, EDI strategy and the actions and projects planned for 24/5. Everyone content with that? Okay, thank you. Agenda item 9, referral report from the JCSC, revised employee policies for approval. Sian?
Thank you, Chair. These HR policies wouldn't ordinarily come to P&R for approval, but it's a function of our timing that we needed to review a set of our policies that relate to family-friendly arrangements, essentially leave and pay relating to childcare and related issues. And there are some legislative changes which are coming into effect from the 6th of April. So we were keen to get those policies reviewed and adopted before the legislation's in effect. They've been reviewed by JCSC, and the committee will be aware that JCSC is the 4 political group leaders, all their deputies, and representatives from the trade unions. And the covering report attempts to provide a summary of what the amendments are to each policy. In many cases, they are amendments just to keep track of legislative changes, in one scenario, we have exercised a discretion and extended the benefit of the policy further, and that's in relation to paternity leave, where the policy changes from the second week pay being statutory pay to becoming contractual pay. So that's obviously a better financial position. And anecdotally, we understand that will be popular, particularly with lower paid colleagues in the workforce. And then also in terms of other changes, there are a number of adjustments where the benefit should be extended to our casual staff and our workers as opposed to employees, and other scenarios where we've just needed to make a change because the legislation has updated around how somebody can claim an entitlement and in what blocks and with what notice and so forth. So, Chair, I'm happy to take questions. Otherwise, perhaps we can take them en bloc.
Absolutely. Questions or comments, please? None I'm seeing. Therefore, we'll take the recommendation 1.1 to 1.6 on a show of hands. Those in favour? It's unanimous. Thank you. That concludes our business, unless there is any A or B that anybody wants to bring to the table. No? Thank you. So on that note, just pause for one moment while Julian would